You picture an Ankylosaurus and instantly you see this walking tank, right? Impregnable armor, maybe even a swipe of that powerful tail club.
Yeah, that's the classic image.
And while that image isn't wrong, here's a paleontological head-scratcher for you. For this dinosaur that's practically the poster child for armored giants, we've actually dug up, well, fewer of its fossils than some of its relatives.
That's true. It makes you wonder what secrets this seemingly well-known beast is still keeping buried.
It's a powerful reminder that even our most familiar dinosaurs are often, shrouded in mystery.
Absolutely. The fossil record, as rich as it is, still offers us only glimpses into these ancient lives. Really just snapshots.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your curiosity and a fascinating subject, backed by solid research, and really dig into the core of it.
And today, a listener wanted to know more about Ankylosaurus.
Yep, so we've gathered the scientific documentation and we're plunging in. This incredible creature lumbered across what is now Western North America during the twilight of the dinosaur age, the Late Cretaceous period, about 68 to 66 million years ago.
Wow. Right there at the end.
Exactly. That puts it right there, one of the last of the non-avian dinosaurs.
And our mission today is to move past the basic picture of, just a heavily armored dinosaur.
Right.
We want to explore the nuances of its anatomy, its evolutionary context, and what the limited but significant fossil finds actually tell us about this iconic animal.
Okay, let's start with the name itself, Ankylosaurus magniventris. That was coined by Barnum Brown back in 1908. Now, Ankylosaurus breaks down from Greek. Think of ankylosis. That's a medical term for bone fusion, right?
Exactly. The Greek root ankylos means fused or maybe bent, and sauros, well, that's easy lizard.
So quite literally, fused lizard. That name hits right at one of its defining features, doesn't it?
Indeed, it really does. And the second part, magniventris, that comes from Latin.
Cool.
Magnus translates to great, and venter means belly.
Great belly.
Great belly. Likely a nod to its incredibly broad and weighty body. It paints a pretty accurate picture, doesn't it?
It really does. And when we zoom out and look at its place in the grand tapestry of life, it occupies a very specific branch. We're talking domain Eukaryota, kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, then down to the Dinosauria. Within that, the Ornithischia, the bird-hipped dinosaurs.
Right, the plant eaters mostly.
Then the Thyreophora, the armored dinosaurs. Further down the branches, we arrive at Ankylosauria, the really heavily armored group.
Tanks.
Exactly. Then the family Ankylosauridae, known for their tail clubs, the subfamily Ankylosaurinae, and finally the tribe Ankylosaurinae.
Phew. A lot of levels there.
Right. And at the very end of this specific twig is the genus Ankylosaurus, containing just one known species, Ankylosaurus magniventris. It's what they call monotypic.
Monotypic, yeah. So it's a unique branch without any currently recognized close relatives within its genus, at least not that we know of yet.
And it's important to appreciate that despite some of the unique characteristics we'll get into, Ankylosaurus is really considered the quintessential ankylosaur.
Yeah, it's kind of the benchmark. Paleontologists often compare other members of this armored group against it. It embodies the very essence of what an ankylosaur is.
Right. Now let's try to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this creature. Estimates put its length at a staggering 6 to 8 meters.
Wow.
That's roughly 20 to 26 feet long.
So like a small bus.
Pretty much. And in terms of weight, we're looking at somewhere between 4.8 and 8 metric tons, which translates to about 5.3 to 8.8 short tons.
That puts it in the running for the title of the largest known ankylosaurid. Imagine something that size, but covered in armor.
It truly is impressive. Picture a creature of that length and that substantial build moving on all fours, a quadrupedal stance. Its body would have been exceptionally wide and robust.
Yeah, a really low center of gravity, a foundation for all that protection.
And then there's that incredible skull. It was wide and low, almost like a bony helmet, right? With a pair of horns jutting backward from the rear.
The squamosal horns.
And another pair below those, angling backward and downward.
The jugal horns, yeah.
But here's where Ankylosaurus throws us a curveball. Unlike most other ankylosaurs, its nostrils weren't pointing forward to sniff out danger. They were facing sideways.
Which is really strange. It makes you wonder why that unusual adaptation evolved.
Definitely. That sideways nostril placement is a key identifier for Ankylosaurus and strongly suggests a unique adaptation.
Yeah, maybe it offered better protection while it was browsing low to the ground, allowing it to remain aware of its surroundings without exposing its nostrils directly.
Or maybe something to do with feeding.
Or it might have played a role in a specialized feeding or sensory mechanism that we just haven't fully pieced together yet. It's one of those persistent mysteries.
And speaking of feeding, at the front of its jaws, it had a beak, likely for snipping off vegetation.
Like shears.
And further back, it had rows of those small, leaf-shaped teeth designed for, well, grinding up plant matter, presumably.
And of course, we can't forget the defining feature. Its armor. The entire body was encased in osteoderms, these bony plates embedded in the skin.
Right.
Its neck was protected by bony half rings, and then there's that iconic massive club at the end of its tail. That tail club alone completely transforms our mental image of this dinosaur.
And the first part of its name, Ankylosaurus, the fused lizard, really comes into focus when we consider the extensive fusion of bones in its skull and throughout its body.
Yeah, that ankylosis. It's a hallmark of the Ankylosaur group and provided incredible structural strength, just solid bone.
So within this armored lineage, who were Ankylosaurus's closest relatives?
Well, the current scientific understanding, based on phylogenetic analysis, points to Dinosaurus and Euoplocephalus as its nearest evolutionary cousins, other North American ankylosaurs.
Okay, now if we step back and look at the bigger picture of its life, Ankylosaurus likely wasn't built for speed, right?
Definitely not. It's generally thought to have been a relatively slow-moving animal.
Though maybe it could have mustered a quick burst of speed if a hungry Tyrannosaurus showed up.
Possibly. You'd hope so, wouldn't you? But yeah, mostly slow.
And that broad, scoop-like muzzle gives us a strong clue about its diet.
Right. The scientific consensus is that it was a non-selective browser, meaning it probably wasn't too picky, just ate whatever suitable low-lying plants were available in its environment. Like a giant armored vacuum cleaner for ferns.
What's really intriguing is the ongoing discussion around those complex sinuses and nasal chambers within its snout.
Oh yeah, the internal plumbing.
Scientists have proposed various ideas about their function, from helping to regulate its body temperature and conserve water,
Like air conditioning?
to potentially even playing a role in how it vocalized. It's like there's this whole hidden architecture inside that bony head.
It certainly raises fascinating questions about the inner workings of these ancient creatures. Like, what did it sound like? Did it make low rumbles?
We can only guess. And it's also worth noting that while Ankylosaurus shared its late Cretaceous stomping grounds with another armored dinosaur, Denversaurus.
Right, which was a nodosaur, remember? That's an ankylosaur relative without a tail club.
Ah, good distinction.
It seems their lifestyles likely didn't overlap significantly. Ankylosaurus might have favored the drier upland regions, maybe?
That makes you think about how these different plant-eating dinosaurs managed to coexist in the same overall environment. They must have carved out their own ecological niches.
Niche partitioning, yeah. Different food sources, maybe different habitats within the larger area.
And of course, Ankylosaurus shared its world with some truly legendary dinosaurs. The apex predator Tyrannosaurus rex,
The big guy.
the horned giant Triceratops, and the duck-billed Edmontosaurus. It was part of a very dynamic and, well, pretty well-populated ecosystem right up to the end of the dinosaur era.
A dangerous place to be a slow-moving herbivore, even one with armor.
Definitely. So how did we first stumble upon the remains of this remarkable animal?
Okay, so the holotype specimen that's the original fossil used to formally describe the species that was unearthed way back in 1906.
Wow, over a century ago.
Yeah, in the famous Hell Creek Formation of Montana. It was an expedition from the American Museum of Natural History, led by the renowned paleontologist Barnum Brown.
Barnum Brown again. He pops up everywhere.
It really does. Interestingly, though, the initial discovery was actually made by a field collector named Peter Kyson.
Ah, give him credit where it's due. And that first find, while not a complete skeleton, was still pretty significant, right?
Oh, yeah. It included a portion of the upper skull, some teeth, part of the shoulder girdle, several vertebrae and ribs, and over 30 of those distinctive osteoderm armor plates.
Okay, so enough to get a decent idea.
Enough to give them a first glimpse of this unusual creature, yeah. Enough to know it was something new and different.
And it was in 1908 that Barnum Brown formally described this new dinosaur to the scientific world, giving it the binomial name Ankylosaurus magniventris that we talked about.
This marked its official entry into the paleontological record.
What's really fascinating is looking back at Brown's initial attempt to reconstruct the complete skeleton.
Right, because the iconic tail club hadn't been found yet.
He actually filled in the blanks based on another dinosaur, Stegosaurus. Really?
Yeah, and even drew parallels to the extinct mammal Glyptodon. You know, those giant armored armadillo relatives.
Oh, it just shows how early understanding is shaped by the available evidence, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That's a crucial point. This early reconstruction, showing robust forelimbs, a strongly arched back, and a short drooping tail lacking a club. It's quite different from our modern image.
And the armor.
And his arrangement of the armor in neat parallel rows down the back was largely, well, a guess. Educated, but still a guess.
Yet this initial vision of Ankylosaurus heavily influenced how it was perceived for decades.
It really did. It highlights how preliminary interpretations, even by leading scientists, can evolve significantly as new discoveries are made. Science in action.
It really does underscore the dynamic nature of science. Interestingly, even back in 1908, another paleontologist, Samuel Wendell Williston, was quite critical of Brown's reconstruction.
Oh, really? What did he say?
He called it too speculative, based on the limited material. He even went so far as to suggest that Ankylosaurus might just be another name for a dinosaur he had previously described, Stegopelta.
Ah, the classic synonymy debate, suggesting they were the same animal.
Yeah.
That suggestion didn't ultimately gain traction, though. Ankylosaurus and Stegopelta are now recognized as distinct genera.
Okay.
It just goes to show you the healthy debates and differing interpretations that are part of the scientific process as paleontologists work to understand these ancient animals.
Exactly. And it's almost a funny twist of fate. Even earlier, back in 1900, Brown had actually found a collection of osteoderms in Wyoming while excavating a Tyrannosaurus skeleton.
No way.
Yeah. Initially, he thought these bony plates belonged to the T-Rex itself.
Huh. Imagine a T-Rex with armor plates. That's a different movie.
Totally. It wasn't until later, after the more complete Ankylosaurus finds, that these isolated osteoderms were recognized as being very similar to its armor.
Wow.
He'd even compared them to some Euoplocephalus osteoderms that, adding to the confusion, were incorrectly labeled as Ankylosaurus at the museum.
Oh, man. Talk about a case of mistaken identity. Fossil finds can be tricky like that.
Definitely. Then, in 1910, another American Museum of Natural History expedition, again under Barnum Brown's leadership, unearthed another Ankylosaurus specimen.
Okay, where this time?
This time in Alberta, Canada. And this discovery was a game changer.
Why is that?
Because it included a remarkably complete skull, the lower jaws, and, crucially, the very first tail club ever found for this genus.
Ah, the missing piece. That's huge.
That tail club discovery completely revolutionized our understanding of Ankylosaurus. It added this incredible defensive weapon to its arsenal.
Changed the whole picture.
Exactly. And then, much later, in 1947, the largest Ankylosaurus skull known to date was discovered, not too far from that pivotal 1910 find.
So those regions of North America, Montana, and Alberta have proven to be key to unlocking its secrets.
Seems like it. What's still striking, though, is just how relatively rare Ankylosaurus fossils are when we compare them to some other ankylosaurs like Euoplocephalus.
Right. We have these few key, fairly complete specimens, and then a scattered collection of isolated osteoderms and teeth. This scarcity adds to the challenge of fully understanding this famous dinosaur.
And that brings us to a more recent and very thorough re-examination of the known Ankylosaurus remains in 2017 by Arbour and Mallon.
Yeah, that was a really important paper.
Their work really highlighted just how unique Ankylosaurus is when you compare it to its closest relatives within the Ankylosaur family. So, despite its iconic status, our knowledge is built on a foundation of relatively limited fossil evidence, which makes each new insight even more valuable.
Absolutely. Every little piece helps. So, should we delve a bit deeper into that unique anatomy, starting with the skull?
Let's do it. We know it was low and broadly triangular in shape, significantly wider than it was long.
Yeah, like a shovel head almost, with a characteristically wide back and that prominent beak at the front, built like a heavily armored battering ram.
And those eye sockets, the orbits, were almost round to slightly oval, and interestingly, they faced a bit forward, not directly to the sides like in many other herbivores.
Right, which might have given it some degree of depth perception, maybe binocular vision, at least partially. Useful for spotting predators, perhaps.
Could be. And then we have those formidable horns. The upper squamosal horns, located at the back corners of the skull, were somewhat pyramidal in shape, pointing backward and slightly outward. Below and in front of those were the jugal horns, which angled backward and downward.
And it's thought that these horns might have originated as separate osteoderms in the skin that eventually just fused onto the underlying skull bone as the animal matured.
Like they got glued on.
Pretty much, yeah, integrated into the skull itself.
What's particularly fascinating about the skull's surface is the intricate pattern of bony ornamentation called caputigulae.
Caputigulae. That's fancy.
Think of the skull almost like a mosaic of bony tiles. These structures are the result of the skull bones themselves remodeling and fusing together.
Right, obliterating the original seams between them, a common feature in adult ankylosaurs, makes the skull incredibly solid.
While the exact pattern of these capitegulae varies slightly between the known Ankylosaurus skulls, there were some consistent features, like a relatively large, often hexagonal or diamond-shaped nasal capitegulum situated right at the front, between the nostrils.
But the snout region of Ankylosaurus was truly exceptional. Arbor and Mallon described its transformation compared to other ankylosaurs as extreme.
Extreme, how so?
Well, it was notably arched and appeared somewhat truncated or cut off at the front. And those nostrils, they were elliptical in shape and pointed downward and outward.
Which we mentioned earlier.
Exactly, a configuration unlike that of any other known ankylosaurid, where they typically face forward or upward. This unique orientation strongly suggests a specialized function.
And those nostrils were also positioned more towards the sides of the premaxilla bones, the frontmost bones of the upper jaw, than in other ankylosaurs.
Additionally, the large, strap-like osteoderms on the sides of the snout, called loreal capitegulae, completely roofed over the enlarged nostril openings.
Like little awnings.
Yeah, exactly, giving the snout a rather bulbous and distinctive appearance. Very unique look.
And the complexity doesn't end on the surface. Internally, the nostrils had an intranarial septum.
A bony wall.
Right, a bony wall that separated the main nasal passage from a sinus. Each side of the snout contained a network of 5 sinuses, with 4 of them expanding into the maxilla bone, the main bone of the upper jaw.
So lots of empty space inside that bony snout.
Seems like it. The nasal cavities themselves were elongated and divided by a central septum, creating mirrored pathways for air. The air passage followed a looped trajectory.
A maze for air.
Kind of. With 2 openings. The external nostrils we've discussed, and the choanae, the internal nostrils that connected to the throat. Very complex plumbing.
Moving back along the jaws, the maxillae, the upper jaw bones, were noticeably expanded outwards, potentially creating a bulge on the sides of the face.
Why the bulge?
Well, this outward expansion might have been related to the presence of those internal sinuses. There was also a prominent ridge on the maxilla, which could have served as an attachment point for fleshy cheeks.
Cheeks. The dinosaurs have cheeks.
It's still debated. But some nodosaurs had bony armor that covered the cheek region, suggesting it might have been embedded in soft tissue. So it's possible Ankylosaurus had them too.
Interesting. The best preserved upper jaw from specimen AMNH 5214 contained an impressive 34 or 35 tooth sockets or dental alveoli in each maxilla.
That's quite a few teeth.
The tooth rows themselves stretched for about 20 centimeters. Interestingly, each tooth socket had a small opening.
Foramina.
Right, foramina, providing a pathway for replacement teeth to emerge as older ones wore down, like a little conveyor belt of teeth.
Always handy for a herbivore. And in comparison to other ankylosaurs, the lower jaw, or mandible, of Ankylosaurus was relatively low in proportion to its length.
So not a deep jaw.
No. When viewed from the side, the tooth row was almost straight rather than noticeably curved. We have complete lower jaws only from that smaller specimen, AMNH 5214, and they measure approximately 41 centimeters in length.
And that one had 71 tooth sockets in total in the lower jaws.
Yeah, 71. The very tip of the lower jaw, the predentary bone, which is characteristic of ornithischians, hasn't yet been discovered for Ankylosaurus, unfortunately. Still missing some bits.
And like other ankylosaurs, the teeth of Ankylosaurus were small, leaf-shaped, and flattened from side to side.
Tiny teeth for such a big animal.
Yeah, they were generally taller than they were wide, and surprisingly small relative to the massive size of the skull. This small tooth size actually allowed Ankylosaurus to accommodate a greater number of teeth in its jaws compared to some other ankylosaurians.
More teeth. Maybe processing food differently.
Could be. Interestingly, the teeth found in the largest known skull are actually smaller than those in the smaller skull.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah, hinting at potential dietary shifts as they aged. Or maybe just individual variation. Some of the teeth located towards the back of the tooth row curved backward, and the crowns typically exhibited a flatter surface on one side.
But here's a crucial detail that helps paleontologists identify Ankylosaurus teeth.
Yeah.
Unlike some other ankylosaurids, the sides of Ankylosaurus teeth are smooth.
Smooth sides. Okay.
And the number of those tiny serrations, the denticles, along the edges of the teeth is also distinctive, usually ranging from 6 to 8 on the front edge and 5 to 7 on the back edge.
So those little details are diagnostic.
Exactly. These subtle features can be incredibly important for classifying isolated finds, like just a single tooth.
Now, when we venture beyond the highly specialized skull, we find that much of the rest of the Ankylosaurus skeleton remains something of an enigma.
Yeah, the body is much less known than the head, ironically.
We don't have a complete picture of its pelvis, the tail beyond the remarkable club, or its feet. These missing pieces make it challenging to reconstruct its full posture and locomotion with complete certainty.
We do know it was a quadrupedal dinosaur, meaning it walked on all four limbs, and that its hind limbs were slightly longer than its forelimbs.
So slightly higher at the hips.
Probably, yeah. The shoulder blade, or scapula, of the holotype specimen measured about 61.5 centimeters in length and was fused to the coracoid, another bone in the shoulder girdle, providing a sturdy anchor for the forelimb.
Fused again, lots of fusion.
The upper arm bone, the humerus, from that smaller specimen was relatively short and very broad, measuring around 54 centimeters. Stout little arms.
And the thigh bone, the femur, was more robust and a bit longer than the humerus, measuring approximately 67 centimeters.
Okay.
While we haven't found complete foot bones based on what we know from other advanced ankylosaurids, it's likely that the hind feet possessed 3 toes.
3 toes, a common trait within this group, yeah.
The vertebrae, the bones of the spine, also offer clues about its posture and how it moved. The neck vertebrae had broad neural spines, those upward projections.
Right, for muscle attachment.
That became taller, closer to the body, providing large surfaces for the attachment of strong ligaments that would have been necessary to support its massive armored head.
Makes sense. Holding up that heavy head.
The vertebrae of the back, in contrast, had shorter and narrower neural spines and were very tightly packed together, limiting the amount it could flex its back downwards.
So a pretty stiff back.
Seems like it. They even possessed ossified tendons, meaning tendons that had turned to bone, which ran along and overlapped some of the vertebrae, further contributing to the stiffness of its back.
Wow, tendons turning to bone. Extra reinforcement.
The ribs of the last 4 vertebrae in the back were fused to the bony structures that connect the ribs to the vertebrae, creating a very rigid section of the torso.
More fusion. A solid trunk.
And the ribcage in that area was remarkably broad, suggesting the presence of a large digestive system necessary for processing a plant-based diet.
Big gut for fermentation, probably.
The vertebrae of the tail, those we have found, show a slightly concave shape on both ends.
And of course, we must discuss the armor in more detail. It was composed of osteoderms, also known as scutes.
The bony plates.
Exactly, bony plates embedded within the skin. Because these osteoderms haven't been discovered in their original life positions, we have to infer their arrangement by looking at related ankylosaurs and the patterns of articulation we can deduce from the shapes of the osteoderms themselves.
So it's like a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces.
Pretty much. In Ankylosaurus, these bony plates varied considerably in size and shape, and they were generally characterized by being relatively thin-walled and hollowed out on their underside.
Hollow, so not solid bone.
Not solid, no, which would make them lighter. Compared to the osteoderms of Euplocephalus, they also tended to have a smoother surface texture.
It's highly probable that there was also a dense covering of many smaller osteoderms and little bony ossicles filling in the gaps between the larger, more prominent plates.
Like bony gravel in between the paving stones, similar to what we observe in other well-preserved ankylosaur specimens.
The main body osteoderms were typically quite flat, often with just a low keel or ridge running along one edge.
Which contrasts with the notosaurid Edmontonia, which sported osteoderms with high, blade-like keels down their midline. Different styles of armor.
However, Ankylosaurus did possess some smaller osteoderms that had a keel running across their midline, so a mix of types.
The cervical half rings, the bands of fused armor plates that protected the neck, are only known from fragmented remains.
So their exact arrangement is still a subject of some debate among paleontologists.
One earlier interpretation proposed that they formed an inverted V shape, but more recent reconstructions suggest they likely formed 2 semicircular plates or perhaps a continuous U-shaped yoke around the upper portion of the neck.
What a bony collar.
Exactly. These structures probably incorporated 6 keeled osteoderms, each with an oval base on each side, providing solid neck protection.
As for the armor covering the rest of the body, it's likely that the osteoderms gradually decreased in size as you move towards the tail.
Makes sense, tapering off.
The largest ones were probably arranged in transverse or crosswise, and longitudinal or lengthwise rows across the majority of its back, possibly with 4 or 5 transverse rows separated by creases in the skin for flexibility.
Gotta have some flex, even with armor.
The osteoderms on the flanks or sides of the body might have been more square or rectangular in shape.
Interestingly, unlike some more basal or primitive ankylosaurs and many notosaurids, Ankylosaurus doesn't appear to have possessed co-ossified pelvic shields.
So no big fused plate over the hips.
Doesn't look like it.
Yeah.
However, some smaller osteoderms lacking prominent keels might have been situated in that area, similar to what we see in Euoplocephalus. There might have been a few transverse rows of smaller, more circular osteoderms covering the pelvis, and smaller triangular osteoderms on the sides of the pelvic region.
And then we get to the tail. It's hypothesized that flattened, pointed plates, resembling those found on the sides of the tail of the Asian Ankylosaurus cycania, might have been present in Ankylosaurus.
Like bony fins along the tail side.
Maybe. Osteoderms with oval-shaped keels could have been located on the upper surface of the tail or the sides of the limbs. More compressed, triangular osteoderms might have lined the sides of the pelvis or the tail.
A whole variety of shapes and sizes.
And a variety of ovoid, keeled, and even teardrop-shaped osteoderms could have adorned the forelimbs, although we currently lack fossil evidence to confirm the armor arrangement on its hind limbs. Lots of speculation still.
And of course, we cannot overlook the magnificent tail club. It's primarily known from that single crucial specimen discovered in 1910.
The game changer.
Exactly. This remarkable structure was formed by two large terminal osteoderms, with a row of smaller osteoderms running along the midline and two small cap-like osteoderms at the very tip, which actually obscured the last vertebra of the tail.
Wow, so the very end bone was hidden inside the club.
Pretty much embedded in it, yeah.
That particular tail club measured approximately 60 centimeters in length, 49 centimeters in width, and 19 centimeters in height.
Decent size, like a big sledgehammer head.
Based on the size of the largest known skull, it's possible that the tail club of that individual could have been even wider, perhaps reaching around 57 centimeters.
Even bigger.
In shape, the club was semicircular when viewed from above, similar to the clubs of Euoplocephalus and Scalosaurus, but distinctly different from the more pointed club of Anodontosaurus or the elongated, narrow club of Diaplosaurus.
So different club shapes, even among close relatives.
The last 7 vertebrae of the tail formed the handle of this formidable weapon.
Handle, right.
These vertebrae were tightly connected and in some cases even fused together, making them immobile and providing a strong, rigid base for the club.
More fusion for strength.
Running along the tail in front of the club were ossified tendons, further strengthening the entire structure and allowing for powerful swings.
Those bony tendons again, acting like reinforcing rods.
The interlocking joints and the shape of the neural spines of these handle vertebrae had a unique U-shape, unlike those found in most other ankylosaurids.
Little anatomical details setting it apart.
There's still some debate among paleontologists about whether Ankylosaurus had a proportionally shorter tail with a larger club, or if it had similar tail proportions to other ankylosaurids but with a relatively smaller club.
So, big club on short tail, or smaller club on normal tail.
Basically. More complete tail material is needed to resolve this question definitively. Still waiting for that perfect fossil.
Always the way in paleontology. When Barnum Brown first described Ankylosaurus, he recognized it as being so unique that he established an entirely new family to contain it, Ankylosauridae.
With Ankylosaurus itself as the prime example, the type genus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He characterized this group by their massive triangular skulls, short necks, stiff backs, broad bodies, and of course the presence of osteoderm armor. Pretty much nailed the key features.
Initially, his definition of Ankylosauridae also included Paleosyncus, a dinosaur known only from isolated teeth.
Tooth taxon.
Yeah.
Always problematic.
And Euoplocephalus, which at the time was known from only a partial skull and some armor fragments. Because the fossil evidence for these early ankylosaurs was quite incomplete, Brown wasn't able to fully distinguish between Euoplocephalus and Ankylosaurus.
Understandable, given the scraps he had.
And he actually tentatively placed the entire group within the Stegosauria, the pleated dinosaurs.
Wow, so initially thought they were closer to Stegosaurus.
Yeah, early days. It wasn't until 1923 that the paleontologist Henry Fairfield Osborn proposed the name Ankylosauria, elevating the armored dinosaurs to their own suborder within the larger group of Ornithischia.
Recognizing their distinct evolutionary path, giving them their own proper group.
Now, both Ankylosauria and Stegosauria are classified together within a broader group called Thyreophora.
The shield bearers. Which makes sense, right? Both groups have armor or plates.
An evolutionary lineage that thrived for an impressive 135 million years.
Wow, long run. As more complete fossils and new genera of armored dinosaurs have been discovered, our understanding of their evolutionary relationships has become increasingly refined and complex. It's always changing.
Today, we generally recognize two main families within Ankylosauria, Ankylosauridae, which, as we've discussed, typically possessed tail clubs,
The club tail.
and Nodosauridae, which lacked this distinctive weapon. You might also occasionally encounter the name Polycanthidae in older literature, another group of armored dinosaurs that did not have tail clubs.
Right, the classification gets tweaked over time. Ankylosaurus itself is classified within the subfamily Ankylosaurinae, a subgroup within the Ankylosauridae.
And as we mentioned earlier, within the Ankylosaurinae, Ankylosaurus's closest known relatives appear to be Anodontosaurus and Euoplocephalus.
In a significant 2015 study that examined the evolutionary relationships of these ankylosaurians, found that these late Cretaceous North American genera formed a distinct group or tribe called Ankylosaurini,
Okay, Ankylosaurini.
and that this North American tribe also included some Asian genera, which is interesting.
What's particularly intriguing about that finding is the suggestion that earlier lineages of ankylosaurids in North America might have faced extinction by the middle of the Cretaceous period.
Like a first wave died out.
Possibly. Then, according to this hypothesis, ankylosaurids recolonized North America from Asia during the Late Cretaceous.
A second wave came across, maybe when sea levels were different.
Right, subsequently diversifying and giving rise to the familiar forms like Ankylosaurus, Anodontosaurus, and Euoplocephalus. This scenario could help explain a puzzling gap of roughly 30 million years in the North American fossil record of ankylosaurids.
Filling in a blank spot in the fossil record. It's like a second wave of armored dinosaurs arrived on the continent. Pretty cool idea.
As with all members of the Ornithischian order, Ankylosaurus was undoubtedly a herbivore, relying on plants for sustenance.
No question there. Its wide muzzle seems to have been well adapted for taking large bites of low-lying vegetation.
Like a lawnmower.
Kind of. Though perhaps it wasn't as highly specialized for this type of feeding as some of its relatives, such as Euoplocephalus, which had an even broader beak.
While it likely wasn't munching on particularly tough, woody plants, Ankylosaurus's diet might have been quite varied, potentially including tougher leaves as well as softer, more pulpy fruits.
It would have had a plentiful supply of ferns and low-growing shrubs in its late Cretaceous environment. Plenty to eat.
If it was endothermic or warm-blooded, as some researchers suggest for dinosaurs, it would have needed to consume a substantial amount of plant matter each day.
Like a lot.
Perhaps in the ballpark of 60 kilograms of ferns, which is comparable to the daily dry vegetation intake of a large elephant.
Wow. That's a serious amount of salad.
It's also been proposed that Ankylosaurus might have supplemented its plant-based diet with invertebrates.
Insects. Grubs.
Maybe. Its small, cusp-like teeth could have been suitable for processing insects or other small creatures. A little protein boost.
Interesting possibility. And interestingly, where patterns observed on Ankylosaurus tooth crowns show abrasion on the face of the teeth, rather than just at the tip, as seen in nodosaurid Ankylosaurs.
So they were grinding differently.
Might indicate a different style of food processing, yeah.
There have been some very small, heavily worn teeth discovered in the same geological formations as Ankylosaurus that have been tentatively attributed to young ankylosaurids.
Baby teeth.
Possibly. This has led to the idea that juvenile ankylosaurs might have engaged in more chewing of their food compared to adults who likely swallowed larger quantities of relatively unprocessed plant matter.
So maybe babies chewed more, adults just gulped it down?
Could be. Given that adult ankylosaurs probably didn't spend a great deal of time chewing, it's plausible that they may have spent less time foraging for food compared to some other large herbivores, like elephants that meticulously grind their meals.
Right, just shovel it in. That broad rib cage we discussed earlier hints at the possibility that they relied on hindgut fermentation.
Like modern herbivorous lizards.
Exactly, where microbes in the hindgut help to break down tough plant material that wasn't thoroughly chewed. Let the gut bacteria do the heavy lifting.
Some earlier research suggested that despite their massive, heavily armored skulls, ankylosaurs possessed relatively weak jaw muscles and limited up and down jaw movement.
Implying a diet of primarily soft vegetation, like mushy plants.
However, more recent studies focusing on Euoplocephalus have indicated that these ankylosaurs were likely capable of both forward and sideways jaw movements.
Some more complex chewing than first thought.
And that their skulls were structurally robust enough to withstand considerable biting forces.
Adding to this picture, a 2016 study revealed that the ability to move the jaws backward in a grinding motion known as pachinal jaw movement actually evolved independently in different lineages of ankylosaurs.
So different groups figured it out separately.
Seems so. including those late Cretaceous North American forms like Ankylosaurus and Euoplocephalus. This suggests that different groups of armored dinosaurs were independently developing more efficient ways to process their plant-based diets.
Yeah.
Convergent evolution.
The retracted position of the nostrils in Ankylosaurus is another intriguing anatomical feature.
Yeah, the sideways nostrils.
Arbor and Mallon, in their 2017 redescription, drew comparisons to the nostril placement seen in some burrowing animals.
Burrowing, really? A giant burrowing tank.
Well, probably not digging extensive burrows. But this retracted position might have offered some advantage if it engaged in other forms of earth-moving behavior, perhaps related to foraging, pushing dirt around.
Maybe. That, coupled with the relatively slow rate at which ankylosaurs formed new teeth compared to other ornithischian dinosaurs.
They didn't replace teeth very fast.
Apparently not.
Yeah.
This has even led to the suggestion that ankylosaurs might have had a more varied diet than just soft plants.
Like what?
Perhaps it was an omnivore to some extent, or maybe it dug for roots and tubers to supplement its leafy meals, using that snout to root around.
Interesting thought. And in a very recent study from 2023 by Ballell and colleagues, researchers found that these late North American ankylosaurids, including Ankylosaurus, had jaws with a lower mechanical advantage compared to their earlier evolutionary relatives.
Well, less bite force for their size.
Relatively speaking, yeah. But they also possessed tooth occlusion, meaning their teeth met in a precise way, and complex two-phase jaw mechanisms.
Fancy jaw movements.
A feature that convergently evolved in some late nodosaurids, which, interestingly, had a high mechanical advantage in their jaws.
So different solutions to eating plants.
Exactly. This all points towards potentially diverging jaw mechanics and how these different groups of armored herbivores were partitioning their dietary resources in the late Cretaceous. It's a fascinating glimpse into the subtle ecological dynamics of the time. Who ate what and how?
Now let's turn our attention to those elaborate air spaces within the Ankylosaurus skull, the sinuses and stuff.
Right, the internal plumbing again. Back in 1977, paleontologist Teresa Marioska proposed several potential functions for these complex sinuses and nasal cavities.
Like what?
Including reducing the overall weight of the massive skull, which seems plausible, housing a specialized nasal gland, or even acting as a vocal resonance chamber to produce specific sounds.
Ah, the resonating chamber idea, making loud noises.
Maybe. But later, the renowned dinosaur expert Kenneth Carpenter offered alternative viewpoint.
Okay, what did he think?
He argued that most animals produce vocalizations using their larynx, that the weight reduction provided by these air spaces would likely have been minimal, and the presence of a specialized gland was purely speculative. Pouring cold water on those ideas? Kind of. He even suggested that these chambers might not have had any specific primary function at all, perhaps being just a byproduct of skull evolution, just space.
However, the idea that these extensive respiratory passages might have played a role in processing inhaled air, perhaps warming or humidifying it in a manner similar to the nasal passages of mammals.
Like a built-in air conditioner and humidifier.
Potentially, yeah. Based on the intricate arrangement of the bony structures within the increased surface area.
A detailed 2011 study focusing on the skull of Euoplocephalus provided further insights.
Okay, what did that find?
This research supported the hypothesis that the complex nasal passages could have aided in heat and water balance, given the extensive network of blood vessels and the increased surface area within these chambers. So, supporting the air conditioning idea. Seems like it. They also suggested that the looping nature of the passages might have acted as a resonance chamber, similar to what we see in some modern animals with elongated nasal passages or tracheas.
So back to the sound idea, too.
Potentially. Interestingly, reconstructions of the inner ear in Euoplocephalus indicated adaptations for hearing low-frequency sounds.
Rumbles.
Which could potentially link to the vocal resonance theory. However, the researchers didn't find strong evidence to support a significant role for these looping passages in enhancing their sense of smell, as the olfactory region was located somewhat away from the main airflow.
So, maybe not primarily for smelling, despite the big nasal cavity.
Carpenter proposed that the specific shape and arrangement of the nasal chambers in Ankylosaurus might have even allowed for a form of unidirectional airflow.
Like birds have. Air flowing one way through the lungs?
Possibly, although there might have been some bidirectional flow in the posterior part of the nasal chamber, potentially directing air past the olfactory lobes. Still complex.
What's interesting to note is that the olfactory region in Ankylosaurids in general tends to be quite enlarged,
suggesting they likely possessed a reasonably good sense of smell.
While the retracted position of the nostrils in Ankylosaurus might initially bring to mind aquatic animals or those with a trunk. Neither of those lifestyles seems particularly likely for this heavily armored herbivore.
No snorkel or trunk, probably not.
Probably not. However, those widely spaced nostrils could have potentially provided Ankylosaurus with stereolfaction.
Smelling in stereo, like surround sound for smells.
Kind of. The ability to perceive smells coming from different directions, similar to how a moose uses its widely set nostrils to locate food or detect predators. Pinpointing smells better.
Ah, okay. Unfortunately, we currently have limited direct evidence to confirm if Ankylosaurus possessed this capability.
Another mystery. The position of their eye sockets, however, does suggest that they had at least some degree of stereoscopic vision, providing them with depth perception.
So maybe decent smell and decent vision.
Seems plausible. Based on some reconstructions of their forelimb musculature, it's hypothesized that the front limbs of Ankylosaurus likely bore the majority of its considerable weight.
Makes sense. Big, heavy front end.
And were adapted for delivering significant force through the front feet, perhaps to aid in gathering food by raking through vegetation.
Pushing plants aside.
Maybe. There's also a suggestion that Ankylosaurus might have possessed some limited digging abilities, although its broad, hoof-like front feet wouldn't have been ideally suited for extensive excavation.
Not exactly a mole.
Definitely not. Overall, the general consensus is that it was a relatively slow-moving and somewhat sluggish creature, but likely capable of short bursts of quicker movement when faced with danger.
The don't tread on me shuffle.
Something like that.
When we consider the growth and development of Ankylosaurus, the observation that the largest known skull had blunter squamosal horns compared to a smaller specimen might indicate changes in its features as it aged.
Right. Horns getting less pointy as they got older. A phenomenon also seen in Euplocephalus. These differences could be a form of ontogenetic variation, changes occurring throughout its lifespan.
Studies on another ankylosaur genus, Pinacosaurus, have provided further insights into their growth patterns.
What did they find with Pinacosaurus?
These studies have shown that as Pinacosaurus matured, its ribs fused to its vertebrae,
More fusion.
its forelimbs became proportionally more robust compared to its hind limbs, and bony outgrowths developed that connected the bones of the cervical half rings and the osteoderms on its body.
So getting more solid and armored as they grew up?
Exactly. These changes likely reflect the increasing need for skeletal support and armor integration as the animal grew larger and heavier.
The pattern of bone formation in the Ankylosaurus skull seems to have followed a general trend, starting with ossification at the snout and the rear edges of the skull, and then progressing inwards towards the center.
Solidifying from the outside in.
And in the rest of the body, the process of ossification appears to have moved in a sequence from the neck region towards the tail, head first, then back along the body.
Now let's discuss its impressive defenses. Those osteoderms that covered Ankylosaurus, while being relatively thin, possessed a unique internal structure that provided remarkable strength.
How so? Thin but strong.
They were reinforced by random cushions of collagen fibers embedded within the bone matrix, a feature distinctive to ankylosaurids.
Collagen fibers, like rebar in concrete.
Kind of like a natural composite material. This arrangement would have created a lightweight yet highly durable armor that was resistant to both breakage and penetration from predator attacks.
Clever design.
They might have even had small bony plates within their eyelids called palpebral bones, offering additional protection for their eyes.
Bony eyelids. Extra safe.
Interestingly, Kenneth Carpenter proposed back in 1982 that the heavily vascularized nature of this armor, meaning it had a rich blood supply.
Lots of blood vessels in the armor.
Yeah. Might have even played a role in regulating its body temperature, similar to what we see in modern crocodilians, helping them to absorb or dissipate heat as needed.
So, armor as a radiator or heat collector, too. Multifunctional.
Possibly. And then, of course, there's that formidable tail club. It's widely accepted as an active defensive weapon, capable of generating a tremendous amount of force when swung.
The business end.
The partially ossified and relatively inelastic tendons in the tail would have facilitated the transfer of considerable power to the club upon impact. Stiff handle, big impact.
It's been hypothesized that powerful muscles in their hind limbs would have provided the necessary leverage to swing the tail effectively.
Swinging it like a wrecking ball.
And a well-aimed blow from that bony club could have even been capable of fracturing the metatarsal bones in the feet of a large predatory theropod like Tyrannosaurus rex.
Ouch, that would leave a mark. A truly devastating natural weapon.
A 2009 study attempted to estimate the range of motion of the tail, suggesting that Ankylosaurus could swing its tail laterally by about 100 degrees.
Pretty light arc.
Decent swing, yeah. The study also indicated that the spongy, cancellous bone found within the tail clubs of adult Ankylosaurus would have made them effective impact weapons, built to hit hard.
However, there's still some uncertainty among paleontologists about whether these clubs were primarily used for defense against predators or also played a role in intraspecific combat.
Fighting each other.
Yeah, perhaps in disputes over territory or mates, like jousting with their tails.
We do have some evidence from other ankylosaurid species that suggests tail clubs might have been used in fights amongst themselves. For instance, one specimen of Tarchia, another large ankylosaurid, showed signs of injury that could have been inflicted by a tail club.
Uh-oh, tail club bruise.
And its own tail club was somewhat asymmetrical, possibly due to wear and tear from such encounters, maybe chipped from hitting another club.
There was also the dummy head hypothesis proposed by John Thulborn.
The what now?
The dummy head hypothesis, which suggested that the tail, with its club, might have resembled a second head, potentially luring predators to attack the tail instead of the more vulnerable actual head.
Like a lizard dropping its tail, but much harder.
Kind of the idea. However, Carpenter and others have largely rejected this idea, partly because the shape of the tail club varies significantly, even within the same genus, making it an unlikely decoy. Doesn't look enough like a head, basically.
Fair point. Ankylosaurus lived during the very final stages of the Late Cretaceous period, approximately 68 to 66 million years ago.
Right up to the KPG extinction event.
Exactly, making it one of the last non-avian dinosaurs to exist before the catastrophic impact. Its fossils have been discovered in various geological formations across western North America.
We mentioned Hell Creek in Montana.
Yeah. Also, the Lance and Ferris formations in Wyoming, the Scollard Formation in Alberta, and the Frenchman Formation in Saskatchewan. Wide distribution at the end.
Interestingly, Ankylosaurus fossils are relatively rare within these sediments, which has led to a couple of potential explanations.
Why so few?
It's possible that it was simply an ecologically rare animal in its environment. Maybe not as common as Triceratops or Edmontosaurus. Or perhaps it primarily inhabited upland areas.
Further from the rivers and swamps where fossils form easily.
Exactly. Upland areas tend to have a lower rate of fossilization compared to the more depositionally active coastal lowlands. So maybe they were common, just not where they'd get buried often.
It coexisted with Edmontonia sp, which was a nodosaur, another type of armored dinosaur, but one lacking a tail club.
Right, the clubless cousins.
However, it's likely that their geographic ranges and dietary preferences didn't overlap significantly. Edmontonia's narrower muzzle suggests it had a more selective diet, and their fossil remains haven't typically been found in the exact same locations as Ankylosaurus. Different neighborhoods, different diets.
Given its relatively low center of gravity and robust build, Ankylosaurus probably wasn't capable of knocking down large trees.
No bulldozer.
And it likely didn't engage in stripping bark from trees either. As adults, they don't seem to have congregated in large herds.
Or solitary.
Seems likely. Making significant large-scale modification of their landscape improbable, unlike some other herbivores like hadrosaurs, which have been suggested as potential ecosystem engineers.
So Ankylosaurus probably didn't reshape the forests much.
The geological formations where we find Ankylosaurus fossils represent parts of the western shoreline of the vast western interior seaway.
That big inland sea that split North America.
Exactly. The environment would have been a coastal plain characterized by floodplain environments, with sediments of sandstone and mudstone being deposited, rivers, floodplains near the coast.
The climate of this region during the Late Cretaceous was warm, ranging from subtropical to temperate, with monsoonal patterns of wet and dry seasons.
So warm and sometimes very wet.
Yeah. There would have been occasional heavy rainfall events, tropical storms, and even forest fires shaping the landscape. A dynamic environment.
The plant life in the Hell Creek Formation, for example, was dominated by flowering plants, or angiosperms.
A relatively new kind of plants back then.
With less common occurrences of conifers, ferns, and cycads. Fossil leaves indicate a largely forested environment composed of relatively small trees.
Lots of undergrowth and smaller trees, perfect browsing height for Ankylosaurus.
And as we've discussed, Ankylosaurus shared this environment with a remarkable array of other dinosaur contemporaries.
The usual suspects.
Including the iconic Triceratops and Torosaurus, the dome-headed Pachycephalosaurus, the ostrich-like Struthiomimus and Ornithomimus, the small bird-like theropod Pectinodon, and of course the apex predator Tyrannosaurus rex.
Quite the neighborhood. It was a truly impressive and diverse faunal assemblage right before the end.
It's quite remarkable how Ankylosaurus has become the quintessential and most widely recognized ankylosaur, really the archetypal member of this armored dinosaur group.
Yeah, it's the one everyone knows. Kenneth Carpenter noted in 2004 that this popularity might be partly attributed to the impressive life-size reconstruction that was featured at the 1964 World's Fair.
Ah, the World's Fair effect.
Capturing the public's imagination, yeah.
Indeed. Arbor and Mallon, in their 2017 study, described it as an iconic dinosaur, and it's true that even early artistic depictions created after the discovery of the tail club in 1910 prominently featured this characteristic weapon.
Yeah, the tail club really sealed the deal on its image. It quickly became a defining trait in the popular image of Ankylosaurus.
It's interesting to observe how our visual understanding of Ankylosaurus has evolved over time. You still see older illustrations depicting it in a rather squatting posture,
Tail dragging on the ground.
often dragging its tail, and sometimes even adorned with spikes along its sides, which we now know are not accurate based on the fossil evidence.
Right, those side spikes are more of an Edmontonia thing.
Modern paleontological reconstructions tend to portray it with a more upright stance, its tail held off the ground, and without those lateral spikes. A bit more athletic looking, maybe.
Well, maybe not athletic, but certainly less like a dragging lump. And there has been some historical confusion regarding its armor, with Ankylosaurus sometimes being mistakenly depicted with the spiky armor characteristic of the nodosaurid Edmontonia.
Giving it spikes it didn't have.
And conversely, Edmontonia occasionally being given an Ankylosaurus-style tail club, even though nodosaurids lacked this feature entirely.
Mixing and matching armor parts. It highlights how our understanding and artistic representations can sometimes get a bit muddled.
Happens all the time, especially with older reconstructions. And of course, Ankylosaurus has made its mark in popular culture, notably in the Jurassic Park franchise.
Oh yeah, saw it there.
However, its portrayed abilities in those films, such as aggressively attacking with its tail with considerable speed and agility.
Running around like a rhino with a sledgehammer tail.
Pretty much. That's been critiqued by paleontologists as being highly unlikely, based on what we know about its anatomy and likely movement capabilities. A bit too much Hollywood flair.
So as we conclude this deep dive into the world of Ankylosaurus, we've seen that while it's an instantly recognizable dinosaur, it possessed a number of unique and even surprising features.
Definitely more complex than just a simple tank.
Our understanding of this armored giant continues to be refined as new discoveries are made and existing fossils are re-examined. It played a significant role in the late Cretaceous ecosystems and continues to hold a prominent place in our popular imagination.
And we hope this deep dive has provided you with a much richer and more nuanced appreciation for this fascinating dinosaur than you might have had before, moving beyond just the basic image of a heavily armored tank.
Yeah, hopefully peeling back some layers of that armor. And on that note, here's a final thought for you to ponder. Considering the relatively limited fossil evidence we have for Ankylosaurus compared to some other dinosaurs, particularly for the postcranial skeleton beyond the armor and tail club,
All those missing body parts.
how significantly might future discoveries alter our current understanding of its behavior, locomotion, and overall place in the ancient world? What key missing pieces of the puzzle are paleontologists still hoping to uncover? Like, what would finding a complete foot or pelvis really tell us?
It's a compelling question that underscores the ongoing nature of paleontological research. What single discovery could change everything? And if you're eager to delve even deeper into the fascinating world of Ankylosaurus, we encourage you to explore some of the scientific research papers and publications that have contributed to our current understanding of this remarkable dinosaur. There's always more to discover.
Absolutely. Go check out the sources.